What's going on? All right, so we're going to get started with Reaper scripts. So jumping straight into it, if we go actions, no, yes, no, actions, show action list. This comes up and we want to go new action and new Reaper script. All right, so it comes up with the correct directory. And what I usually like to do is, and what I suggest that you do, is make a folder for yourself. I call mine DL scripts because that's my initials, and that way all the scripts that you make are in one spot, which I think is a good way to go. So see down here, save as type. It defaults to Lua files, and if we click that, there's also the option of EEL2 files. So the way Reaper scripts works is there's a couple of different programming languages you can use to write these things in. And I feel like they could all achieve a similar outcome. For this video and for all of my videos, we're going to use Lua. I feel like it's probably a good choice to learn. And if you do some research, you'll see that it's quite a popular one. It's what a lot of people tend to use for these things anyway. So that's what we're going to go with. So make sure it's on Lua. Cool. And now we're going to give our script a name. What do we call it? So we want to send an item to the start of a session for our first script. Item send to start. I'm so bad at naming these things. I'm sure you can think of a better name for this, and if you do, please call it something better. But that's what mine's going to be called. All right, so you make it, and this console interface comes up, and this is where we can write our script. Cool. All right. So what the idea is a script is a set of instructions, and you write the script, you get it all how you want it to be. You can then, if I close that, you can then assign a shortcut to that script, or you can find your script or your action, your new action in the actions list here. So in the actions list, you can find it here and you can click run. Of course, it's not going to do anything right now because we haven't actually told it to do anything. It's just an empty script. You can click run, or you can set up a shortcut to it. And you can also go back to your script to edit it in this window as well. So you can go edit action down here, and it brings this back up. All right. So how I like to go about these things is I like to outline what it's going to do just in plain English using comments. So if you're not familiar with coding languages, that's totally fine. You'll be able to follow along with these videos. What a comment is a line in a script like this that is completely ignored by the computer. And the utility of that sort of thing is we can plan things, we can communicate things. You can write in plain English what you want to do or what a particular bit of code is intended to do. And you can leave notes for yourself and others and all that sort of thing. So to make a comment, you start the line with hyphen hyphen, and you might have seen that it changes color. You can see up here, hello is white. That means that the computer's going to try and interpret that as something, and it's not going to get very far because that's not code, that's just the word hello. But you can see down here, this is turned lilac, or whatever you want to call that. the computer's going to completely ignore this line and this line. Another thing to be aware of, empty spaces and empty character returns are also, for the most part, ignored by the computer. So you'll see me do that a lot. I'll be making empty lines just to keep things visually neat. But just bearing in mind that doesn't actually have an effect on the functionality of the script. All right, so yeah, let's start talking about what the steps are to make this thing happen. So just to talk about what we want the outcome to be, we want a shortcut key to take your selected item and move it to the start. Very simple, but you know, it's our first video, so it should be simple. That's what we want to do. Now, the first thing that we want to check in our script is we want to actually check to see if the user has any items selected. So we want to make sure that there are at least one item selected. How I'm going to have the functionality of the script, if you know these 6 are selected and we do the shortcut key, it's just going to move the first one back. Okay, that's how we're going to design this thing. So if there are at least one item selected, then proceed. Otherwise, do nothing. So in Reaper scripts, you can have it so that like alert boxes come up saying error or whatever. I don't think that's necessary for this one because from a user's point of view, you know, if you press the shortcut, for me it's going to be Shift Enter. You press Shift Enter, nothing happens. It should be pretty obvious why. So I don't think we need to alert the user what they did wrong. They should be able to see on screen like, oh, I forgot to click on the thing. So we can just do nothing, and then the script will end, and then we're out of the script. And then the next time they press Shift Enter, the whole script will run again. That's how these things work. Cool, otherwise do nothing. But yeah, if there are at least one item selected, we get a reference to the first item selected. We'll talk about what exactly that means in a moment, but that's this is sort of a pattern that's going to come up again and again in these Reaper scripts. We get references to things. You know, if you want to do something to an item, you need to get a reference to that item. If you want to change the value of an item, like the volume or whatever, or the name, you need to first get a reference to that item, and then you can act on it. That's the idea here. So get a reference to the first item selected. Set the start position of the first item of the item to 0. So 0 is the start of the session. And that's it, really. Those are the steps involved. So like I said, it's a pretty simple script, but it's our first one. So we first check that there are some items selected, and then we get a reference to the first item selected. If you've only got one selected, that is the first. But if there are no selected items, then we don't actually get to this point, because we kind of reroute the logic of the script to not enter this area, and we just finish early, if that makes sense. And we'll obviously talk about how to do that. Okay, cool. Now, I want you to open up your internet browser. We're going to be pretty much visiting this website every one of these videos. But if you type into Google Reaper API, comes up with this one here. So this is the Reaper API. This is sort of like a documentation of all the functions, all the inbuilt functions that Reaper scripting has to offer. And when you first look at it, it's pretty daunting. But you will see that there are some common ones that we keep going back to video after video. And then you'll start to see the pattern. Like I mentioned before, you know, if you want to do something to an item, you have to get a reference to the item, and then you do stuff to the item using that reference. That sort of pattern comes up again and again. So while this looks like a lot, and you know the text is very unattractive and daunting, yeah, we'll work our way through it, and it'll be more familiar if you stick with these videos. All right, so I'm gonna go Control F for find, and first we want to count selected media items. So I'm gonna click on this. Oh, but before I do, what this is doing is this is how we check to see if we have items selected. Because if the count of selected media items is 0, then we don't have any selected media items, and then we do nothing. So click on this one, and that takes us down to here. Now it gives you 4 versions of pretty much the same thing, and you can see that the third one is the Lua version of it. So there are slightly different syntaxes for the different programming languages. So when you are looking up a function, if you are writing a Lua script, like we are, excuse me, make sure you copy the Lua version. So I'm going to copy this back to my Reaper script here, and I'm going to leave these comments in place. And I'm just going to write the real thing below it. So that's going to be sort of the structure that we keep. You'll have the plain English comment, and then sort of like how that's facilitated in the code. So if you look back at this later on, you'll be like, oh, right, that's what we did. We were making sure that we had selected items, and this is how you do it. You count the media items using this API function. All right, so if you just copy it in like that and you click run, if you go Control S, that will try and run, but it's not going to work straight away. You'll see it says syntax error near Reaper. So sometimes this message is useful, like it tries to kind of guess what you did wrong. Sometimes it's not super helpful. You know, syntax error near Reaper, that doesn't really tell you much. But yeah, when you copy and paste a function, it's not really the whole story. You have to format it a little bit differently, and we'll get the hang of it together. So just a quick note about how this works. This is a function, and one of the telltale signs that we're looking at a function is the brackets. Sometimes the brackets will be empty like this, or sometimes there will be an item in the brackets, and that item is known as an argument. And what the things inside the brackets are, these are bits of information that you feed into the function that helps the function give you back the answer that you want. Not all functions give an answer. This is a function that gives you an answer. It gives you a count of the number of selected items. Other functions sort of do stuff, but this is a function that just gives you back an answer. That's all it does. And the answer is the number of selected items, and it's in the form of an integer. So an integer is a whole number, and that's the data type that it's returning to you. It returns an integer. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to highlight the word integer, delete it, and I'm going to write num of selected items equals. Okay, so a few things to mention about what we just did. Num of selected items. What I'm doing here is I'm creating a variable with the name num of selected items. That's the name that I'm calling it. But we could have called this anything, right? We could call it cell items or selected items. How many? You can call it whatever you want. There are some rules with variable names. You can't start a variable name with a numerical digit. And there are some words that you can't call a variable, like you can't call it then, because then is a keyword used elsewhere. But the name that we originally had was fine, num of selected items. Now the capital letters, scratch that. I was going to overcomplicate it, but I'm not going to just yet. Num of selected items. Cool. So what we're doing here is we're initializing a variable called num of selected items, and then we're giving it a value, and that value is whatever the outcome of this function is, right? Cool, so we're getting there. Now, if I go Control S to run, it's still not going to work, and that's because what we've written here isn't how we need to structure it. So what this is asking for, like I mentioned before, the stuff inside of brackets is the information that you feed into a function that helps the function either do the job that it's intended to do or give you the return to you the information that it is designed to return to you. Okay. And what it's asking to know about is what project are we looking at? Because Reaper, you can have multiple projects open, and it's asking what project are we looking at when we're evaluating how many selected items. Now this calls for a comment. 0 is the active project, i.e. the project in focus, or the project you have open right here. So we type in 0. So 0 is the index. That's what I should write. 0 is the index of the active project. So that's all you need to do. You pass in 0, and now it'll work. So I just pressed Control S. You can see it says save and compiled. It hasn't really done anything, because what's happened so far is we have a variable. It's called num of selected items. It stored whatever value it gave. It would have given the number 0 because I don't have any selected. But if I do this, run it again, it would have stored the number 4 in here. And then it would have proceeded down the script, saw that there was nothing else, ended the script, deleted this piece of information, and we carry on with our day. So very uneventful. So this actually worked, but because we haven't actually done anything more with it, it's uneventful. But we are making progress. Okay, so we've got our reference to how many selected items there are. I'm going to come back to these points and do that last, but we're going to push on assuming that we have one highlighted. So I'm going to highlight one in the background there, just so it's true. And we're going to jump down to this one. Okay, get a reference to the first selected media item. Okay, so that's another API function. So back to our browser. Get selected media item. This is the one we want. Get selected media item. Cool. So remember to always make sure you're looking at the Lua version. I'm going to copy that. back into here. All right, so we have another Reaper function. We can recognize that it's a function because of the brackets after the name of it. But this time it needs two pieces of information. The other one just had one argument that you pass in. This one has two. It needs to know two things. It wants to know which project you're looking at. So that's 0 again for the active project. And this time, the other thing it wants to know about is which of the selected items are we looking at? Now, how that works is if you have these 4 selected, those selected items are indexed by Reaper. And what that means is this one here is number 0. Not number 1, but number 0. This is selected item number 0. This is selected item number 1, 2, 3. And if I highlight some more, this will be 4 and 5. So when we're doing this function, it wants to know what index of selected item we're looking at. So 0 is the index to the first selected item. So we can pass in 0 again. So we're nearly there, right? This is another type of function that its main purpose is to return back to you an answer to a question. And the question is, can we please have a computery reference to an item? And that's what this is, the data type media item. Now, if I run this, it's going to complain. There we go. Syntax error near Reaper. So again, not a very helpful suggestion, but we need to format it similar to what we're doing up here. So what we do is we need to give a variable name for this reference. So first selected item, that's fairly logical, right? Again, it can be anything within those rules that I outlined earlier. So that's the name of the variable that I'm initializing. And then we give it a value with an equal sign. And the value is whatever the outcome of this function is. Okay, so if I run the script, saved and recompiled, that sort of means that it worked. Nothing happened because all we've done is we've got an answer to this question. It was 1. We got an answer to this question, which is the data type of the media item. And then we end and nothing happens. But we're getting closer. Cool. So now that we've got the reference to that item, we can now do stuff. So now I forget the name of this actually, but set media item position. Turns out I didn't forget. Set media item position. Cool. Copy that. Make sure it's the Lua one. There we go. Now this is an interesting one. This is what's interesting in a number of ways. It's a function similar to the other ones. This time it takes 3 arguments. Not 1, not 2, but 3. It takes 3 arguments. But unlike the other functions, it actually does something on the session. So it does something, but it also returns a value. Now, a Boolean, if you're not familiar with what a Boolean is either true or false. A very simple data type. But what the Boolean is basically like a success Boolean. So you don't actually need to listen to that. You don't actually need to store that like we've been storing the other return values. there's utility in getting a success or failure Boolean, but for us, we're not going to use it, so you can just get rid of that one. All right, so now we need to populate the arguments with what we want them to be. So we want a reference to the media item. So that's just going to be this guy. So we copy that. And the reason why I copy and paste things is because if you get the spelling or if you get the capitalization wrong, it's not going to work. So the safest way is just to highlight a variable name, Control C, Control V. Then you know that you spelt it the same. Good habit to get into. The position that we're going to move it to, that is 0. Now this one here, refresh UI, from memory, if you make this true, what that means is as soon as you run the script, that change is going to appear on screen, which is what you usually want. So yeah, we want to see the action take place instantly, right? Of course we do. So you delete whatever I just deleted, and you write true there. The alternative would be to write false. Those are the only two options where Booleans are concerned. All right, so we're getting closer. We've got an item selected. Now I'm going to press Control S. Hey, look at that. And maybe this orange one here. Nice. All right, so we have success. It's doing good stuff. We're not quite done yet. So if I click over here, I don't have any items selected right now. And if I try and run it, we get this error. It's a bad argument to number 1 selected media item. So what's happened is we don't have any items selected, right? So when we do this, we're asking it to look at the first selected item, but that doesn't exist. So the return value of this function is nothing. And the technical term for that in Lua is nil. So this will be nil. And then this will be nil as well. It's the same thing. So we're passing in nil where we're not allowed to pass in nil. That's what's happening. So if I do it again, bad argument number 1. So it's expecting a real reference to a media item, and instead it's nil. So that's why we need this stuff here. We need to first check that we do indeed have at least one media item selected. So then that will ensure that this will be an actual reference. All right, so how that works is if number of selected items is greater than 0, then, and I'm going to highlight all this. I'm going to press tab. Oops, do it twice. And then after everything, we're going to write end. So what we're sort of doing here is we're wrapping this stuff inside of this if statement. So how this works, or how the script in general works, is it starts here. It doesn't see this stuff because remember it ignores comments. It gets to here, it populates this, then it moves down, 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 and then it gets to here. So how an if statement works is it looks at this statement here. You don't have to do this, but it can be clear to put the stuff in brackets. That's not necessary, but it can be good as an explanation tool. So the stuff inside the brackets is the statement that the program evaluates, and it will either evaluate it as true or false. Now, if this is true, then it enters into the if block. If this is false, it doesn't enter inside and it just skips to the end. So that's how our check is going to work. If I don't have any selected items, it's going to do this. It will do that. And then it's going to get to here, evaluate this. This will be false. So then it's going to go to the end. But now if I highlight this guy and click run, it works, because what happened is it did this one, same as before. The answer was 1, the value was 1. It looks at this, is 1 greater than 0? Yes, it is. So that's true. So then it enters inside the if block, and then it does the stuff inside of the if block. And that's it. That's our script. And just once more, in case it was a fluke, the nice one. All right, so that's the script. I'm going to leave all the comments there because I feel like they're probably useful for you to refer back to. Now the last thing to do, we want to find our script, and you can add a shortcut. So I'm going to go Shift Enter. I said I'm going to go Shift Enter. Special key. Sure. Shift Enter. Cool. So now Shift Enter. Shift Enter. Oh boy, I could do this all day. Nice. Satisfying, right? When you make a script and then it does stuff. Cool. So that's pretty much it. I kept it as simple as I possibly could. In later videos, we'll do some more complex things and like a few things that improve the workflow of creating these scripts. But just as a final note, if you go back into the actions list, you can go to your script and you can go edit action, just as a reminder if you want to go back and see it in the text form. And yeah, that's it. Hopefully you found that useful, and hopefully you stick with me for future videos. There's going to be more.